Okay. Thank you. Near you. Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Breakfast and Learn. Welcome to Rabbi Gary Wayland. For those joining on Zoom, welcome. You're missing out on a nice breakfast. And over to you, Rabbi Wayland.
Okay. Morning, all. It's lovely to be back here in person. I think kind of the way that the cycle worked out. I think I did the last one that wasn't in person. I think the last time I was there. So it's nice to see you all back here in person. I'll obviously see many of you in the course of the weeks for davening and so forth. So just a few minutes to share a bit of background to the time period which we find ourselves in. I think one of the great not tragedies, but one of the things we miss out on very much, I wouldn't call it a tragedy, but one of the things we miss very much out on in sort of Jewish study is the Haftarahs. I think we're good with the Parsha, we have like the Torahs and the Parsha the whole time. I think Daf Yomi has become very, very popular, which is wonderful. So like, people studying the Talmud day in, day out. I think Tanakh, and specifically the Haftarahs are kind of a bit weaker, which is maybe something in Israel actually that it's become quite strong. There's a program called 929 in Israel, 929 for the chapters of Tanakh, which was very popular, has now run into some controversy. We'll save that for another time. But the first, but I think Tanakh, generally outside, it's something that we can strengthen, and I think especially when we consider that every week we read the Parsha, and we have the Haftarah as well, which is really kind of, I suppose, our sages' commentary on the Torah portion. Okay. So, that every week we have a Torah portion, and then we have a selection from the Haftarah, which is meant to guide us, how to reflect on the Torah portion. So generally speaking, it's either kind of often it's a reflection of the Torah reading, right? And, if a story happens in the Haftarah, what does that teach us about how the Parsha is meant to be read? Whatever. So, for example, last week we read about Bilam's, the story of Bilam and the story of Balak, and the Haftarah is very much kind of from the Jewish perspective, because the Parsha is very much about, we almost exclusively hear just from the non-Jewish perspective, and the Haftarah is the Jewish perspective. So what's going on over there? There's times when we read about this is my favorite one actually. You read through the Parshas of Saras, it comes across as, very sort of technical sin-based stuff. And then we reach the Haftarah, which is about the four Mitzarim who were trapped outside the city, and the time period escapes me. But they end up saving the Jewish people. I think it's from I can't remember who it is now. Someone retrieving my memory. But over there, you've got kind of almost the opposite. Saras in the Torah is kind of presented very much as this sort of, it is sin-based, it is impurity. But in the Haftarah, those are the ones who save the day. So I want to speak about the Haftarahs that we're going to read for the next couple of weeks. That was kind of a slightly long introduction that is not necessarily going to, whatever. We're going to read about the Haftarahs, okay? And I want to introduce the main, I suppose, the main Navi that we're going to be reading about in the next few weeks, which of course is Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu. How many Jeremys do we have here? Anyone? No Jeremys? Okay, well, that's quite unusual. So Jeremiah. Does anyone know why it's Jeremy and not Jeremiah? So there's a custom actually in Hebrew. I wonder if it translates to English as well. So there's a custom that people don't actually say Yirmiyahu in full. They just say Yirmiyah, and the reason is because in his end wasn't necessarily his end, as we're going to see. He was killed for his prophecies. So he in Hebrew he's often referred to as Yirmiyah, right, with a shortened name rather than Yirmiyahu. The full name, and I don't know, sort of Jeremiah is kind of the same reflection of that. So we're going to meet Jeremiah today, right? Jeremiah is the Haftarah that we're going to read about today. So the reason why I said the introduction is kind of generally that's most weeks of the year. Generally, most weeks of the year, the Haftarah reflects the Parsha. There's certain times of the year, and this is going to be one of them, where the Haftarah is more to do with the time rather than to do with the actual specific theme of the Parsha. So Jeremiah was one of the prophets, and we're going to sort of have a very, very brief overview of his life. And I think the reason it's so important is because his words are, he's known very much as the prophet of doom. Some of his prophecies are extremely harsh. He was speaking at a very, very dangerous and difficult time, but also some of his prophecies are also full of hope and full of, some of the most beautiful words of all of Tanakh. And sort of it really behoves us to sort of understand, what we understand a little bit about him. And then when we read the Haftarahs and when we come to read the book of Lamentations and on Tisha B'Av, it shouldn't happen in a few weeks' time, then we can sort of have a bit of a sense of perspective. So Jeremiah was the prophet who was living at the time of the destruction. So the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. Just to go back a stage, so Sanherib has exiled the 10 tribes. The dates sort of escape me from the top of my head. It's roughly 550 BC, I think. Is that right? Great, excellent. So that was they were exiled. The prophet at that time was primarily Isaiah and his prophecies. Fast forward a few years and a few kings, we've got the righteous King Yeshayahu, who was killed, and then sort of Jeremiah, just made my mind up if I'm speaking Hebrew or in English. Jeremiah was speaking kind of towards the end of his, he was over King Yeshayahu, the subsequent kings, and then the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So that was his background. He witnessed the destruction. There's actually a very famous, I wouldn't say it's a midrash, because it doesn't actually exist as a midrash, but I'd say it's a legend, although midrash kind of falls into that to an extent. But it's not recorded in sort of traditional Jewish midrashic collections, which was that after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, so I think it was Aristotle, or Ben, probably someone can correct me on this, was sort of wondering the destruction of, I don't know how the time frame fits in, but one of the, I think it was Aristotle, the legend says, or Plato, was wondering the destruction, and sort of sees the stones there and sort of meets Jeremiah, who's sort of mourning over the destruction, mourning over the destroyed stones, and says, what are you crying over? They're just physical stones. Ideas are so much more. And then he says to him, sort of like, so why are you mourning over the stones? He says, give me any questions you might have, and he gives him the question, philosophical questions, and he answers all of them. He says that the source of my wisdom is from these stones. So he was sort of around the times of some of the classic Greek philosophers. Again, you might be able to update me with some of the dates over there. So we're going to meet him just now. All right. So Jeremiah was a prophet. He was a Cohen, and when we're introduced to him, we're sort of straight away. We've got one of the there's a fancy word for this one, his annunciation scene. All right. So annunciation is that God calls upon him, straight away. So sort of we learn of him as a young man. God comes to him. So it says that he came to him the days of Yeshayahu, in the 13th year of his reign. So it gives him a bit of a background over him, right? A bit of a historical background. The words of God come straight to him. So we don't sort of learn much about his history. Straight away, God is speaking to him. He refers to him as a nar. Right, a nar is a young, probably of a mitzvah boy, a youth. We don't know exactly how old he was when he started receiving prophecy, but straight away he gets prophecy. And God says to him these beautiful words. Okay, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you came out of the womb of your mother, I sanctified you. Navi lagoyim nasaticha, a prophet lagoyim, to the nations I placed you. Right. So from his birth, God already had chosen him for a mission. God says to him that I'm going to ask you to go. So Jeremiah responds to him, like, God, what is this? And he says, I don't know how to speak because I'm a boy. And God says back to him, don't worry about it. Whatever I'm going to say to you, you're going to do. Whatever I command you, you're going to do. He then sort of gives him these sort of prophecies. The first line he says to him, which is quite amazing. So, see, I have appointed you today over the nations and over the kings. Right. So this is a great thing to say to a young boy, but this was his mission from a very young age. I have appointed you lintosh, lintos, to smash, to destroy, lahavid, another word for destruction, laharos, another word for destruction. Right. So he says to him, I'm giving you this mission. It's going to be to absolutely wreck everything. Right. You're going to go to kings. You're going to tell them everything they're doing is wrong. You're going to go to the nation. You're going to tell them that you have to repent. Right. However, that's not the end of the verse. The next two words, livnos, to build, vilintoa, and to plant. It's interesting. It's that way round. Normally, you suppose you plant before you actually build. It's the other way around. It's first of all building and afterwards planting the seeds. I suppose sometimes in the wake of destruction, you have to kind of get the structure up first of all, and then afterwards you lay the foundations, which are going to be long term. So this was Jeremiah's mission. He was going to go to the kings. He was going to go to the nations, and he was going to give them really, really severe prophecies. And those are the prophecies that we learn about throughout the book. So the book of Jeremiah is quite large, like sort of some of the other books of Tanakh. It's not as big as Yeshayahu. It's not as big as Isaiah, but it's full of really quite severe prophecies. Jeremiah also wrote the book of Eicha. Okay, so the book of Eicha, which we obviously read on Tisha B'Av, very short book. It's 4 chapters, not very many. Sorry, 5? Yeah, the 5. Yeah, so 5 was very small. But so they're very, very small. Sort of, it's not a big book. It's actually completely ahistorical. If you read through it, it's not sort of pinned down to a specific time. It's deserves a much long time to think about. But it's sort of it's a reflection in the quietness of the destruction after everything that's happened. So you've got the build up to destruction, which is all of the book of Jeremiah, and then afterwards you've got the separate book which we read. We'll learn a bit that. So actually, we'll speak about it just now. So the book of Lamentations of Eicha is actually referred to in the book of Jeremiah. So in the 16th chapter, God says to him, sorry, is it the 16th? Sorry, 36, chapter Lamed Vav. So in the 36th chapter, it actually refers to the story of Eicha. So this is in the 4th year of King Yoakim, one of the wicked king who sort of presided around the downfall. So God spoke to him. I want you to get a scroll, and I want you to write everything I've spoken to you about Israel and Judah from the nations, and I want you to write it down. And perhaps they'll hear about all the disasters and they'll turn back from their wicked ways. So Jeremiah calls Baruch ben Neriah, who's his scribe, and he writes down this book. Okay. So Jeremiah says to his scribe that I can't go out; they're going to kill me. But I want you to go and read it. So he writes down the book and takes it outside. He reads the scroll in front of the king, and they're not very, very pleased with it. They're quite sort of offended by the contents of the book. The book gets burned, and then afterwards, so that again we have to look at the book of Eicha in detail. So it gets rewritten afterwards with an extra chapter. So I think it's the ones which are in alphabetical order. I think the original ones, and then the last chapter is the one that's out of order, was added on, and I think they were reordered as well. So that's the book. It's read in public. It then gets destroyed. Jeremiah, who is living under threat of death, and so the conclusion of that chapter over there. So Jeremiah, who got another scroll, gave it to the Baruch ben Neriah, who wrote the whole text, like the one that was burned, and more of the like was added. Right, so that's written in the book of Jeremiah about the scroll of Eicha. Right? So that's a reference to the book of Eicha, and obviously when we read it, it's kind of completely different. It's a very different tone, a very different style. but at the same time it's referred to in the book of Jeremiah. So again, if you read through it, many of it is quite destructive, but at the same time, some of his prophecies are, beyond stunning. Some of which will be very, very familiar to you. He prophesies. There's a couple of things, just sort of main ones that stand out. First of all, is that he commands. He sends prophecies to the exile. So the exile didn't just happen in one go. It wasn't just sort of the temple was destroyed and that was it. There were waves of dispersal before that. So before it was 14 or 16 years before the final destruction, Jews were sent to Babylonia. And that's where kind of they remained after the destruction of the first temple. After 70 years, some of them came back. All of them, Jews remained there for the next 1500 years or so, until sort of really about 1000 CE. But Jeremiah sends messages to these exiles, some of which again is going to be quite familiar to you. So this is in chapter 29. So says God, to the community which I've exiled from Jerusalem to Babylonia. Right, so his message is as follows, and this actually is like a message of how we are to conduct our lives in Gullus. Build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat their fruits. Right, so he's telling the exiles, right, where you are, don't just sit there mourning, build. Okay, plant houses. So this time, build houses, plant gardens, eat their fruits. Get married, take wives to your sons, give daughters to your husbands, they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there, do not decrease. Don't think about like, that's it, game over the Jewish people. I want you to have families, I want you to settle. Okay. Next slide. Okay. Seek the welfare of the city to which I've exiled you and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its prosperity shall you prosper. Right. That actually we reenact every single week because that's the source for the prayer for the prayer for the royal family. Right, I want you to seek the peace of the city, and I want you to pray for it, because in the prosperity of the city, you shall prosper, and that's obviously not just in terms of saying the prayer, but this is like whole conduct in exile. I want you to sort of be good citizens, because when the nation around you prospers, you're going to do well. So ignore the false prophets. They're going to prophesy you and they falsely. Ignore them. And then, however, at the same time as building and having children and thinking about the future, the prophecy concludes, when Babylonia's 70 years are over, I will take note of you and I'll fulfill my promise and I will take you back. Right, so it's kind of this sort of paradoxical way of living. I want you to be fruitful on the land, but at the same time, you are going to go back home. Right, sort of the utter paradox. I want you to do as much as you can while you're here, but as soon as the moment is up, boom, I want you to go to Exile. And the 70 years is the background to the Purim story, sort of when that transitional period was happening, and so that's the whole book of Ezra and Nehemiah as well. That whole background, that 70 years, I want you to do as much as you can now, but when those years are done, boom, you have to be ready straight to go. So very familiar stuff. Okay, and then this is chapter 33, with which we'll conclude. So again, these words will be familiar to you, but they are just beyond beautiful. So God speaks to the word of God came to Jeremiah a second time. He was still imprisoned at this time. Right, so says God, who's planning it, the Lord is shaping it, whose name is God. Call to me, I'll answer you, I'll tell you wondrous things, secrets you have not known. 1 second. I'm gonna have to. Okay, I'm gonna have to read the whole thing because I don't know if I can read the whole thing. I'm gonna read select verses from this because you need to get a bit the context as well, because I don't want you to read the famous line. I want to read the context of the famous line as well. Okay, so says God, those who were filled by those who went to fight the custom, whose corpses when I struck down in my anger I arranged, hiding my face from the city because of their wickedness. Right, so it starts off, bad stuff has happened, people have died, people are going to continue to die. Right, however, I'm going to bring her relief and healing. I will heal them, reveal to them abundance of true favor. I will restore the fortunes of Judah and Israel. I will rebuild them as old. She shall gain through me fame, joy, glory above all the nations of the earth. and they will thrill and quiver because of the good fortune and prosperity that I provide for her. So this is verse 10 over here. So says God, right? There shall be heard once again in this place about which people say, it's destroyed. There is no one here. There is no people, no animals in the cities of Yehuda and the courtyards of Jerusalem that are desolate, that they have no man on them, no one lives them, no animals. Right. Nevertheless, and this is the famous line, nevertheless, once again in that place, we will hear the joy, the voice of joy, the voice of happiness, the voice of the chassan, the voice of the color, the voice of all of those saying, give thanks to God because he is good, forever his kindness endures. We shall bring a thanksgiving offering for the house of God, because God is going to restore all of the exiles as back as it was originally. So I mean that's just kind of one of the so I mean that is obviously we recite every time we those words are utterly beautiful, and every time I hear them, send shivers down my spine. So I mean we've got sort of the two extremes with Yirmiyahu. Just one thing I have to add actually, because despite having the mission at the beginning, that you are going to the people, you're going to speak to the kings, right? Again, he ends up being thrown in prison most of his life, his guild, for what he said. But, and this is quite amazing, right? And God said from the very beginning, this is going to be your path. This is going to be your lot, right? Initially, Jeremiah, who says, I'm just a boy, I can't deal with that, okay? I have to find it in chapter 15. Again, this is his personal reflection on it. This is Jeremiah's personal reflection on his mission. God, you remember me, you appointed me. So remember me, appoint for me to take vengeance from those who chase me. Don't let your anger linger. Know that they have you abused me, exposed my shame. However, nevertheless, says Yirmiyahu, your words were found and they were offered, but they brought me joy in my heart because your name was called upon me. Right? Remarkable words, right? That this time he's in prison when this is said. He's had a possibly the toughest mission out of all of the prophets, because he's told it's going to be hard, and it was hard. But nevertheless, he says that this mission brought me joy, despite having to go, be the harbinger of doom, literally. He had such a connection to God that he was able to do it with a sense of almost tranquility, and throughout his life, he's never desperate, he's never scared, but he does it with a sense of tranquility and a sense of joy. Obviously, we are starting the 3 weeks, which is the time period in which kind of we live almost Jeremiah's prophecies. We live his the foreboding sense of destruction, which culminates in Tisha B'Av, culminates in the book of Eicha. But after Tisha B'Av, we move forward, which is the time of hoping to hear again the voice of joy, the voice of color in the courtyards of Jerusalem. Please God, so whichever way it is, we can sort of reflect on this time period and sort of take the mussar from our prophets to try and sort of look in and see what we can do ourselves to move forward and sort of bring about the redemption in whichever ways we can. That's what I started off with. He was the prophet. He was the prophet too. At the same time, he's got these snippets that are so beautiful. Yeah. Gloom and doom. Yeah. It was very sad. He had a very, very sad life. Jeremiah, yeah. Stay cool, everyone. Thank you. That was okay. Is that right?
That was great. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, yeah.